can't clear my name, Reed. I need people that believe in truth and justice to help do that. But it is my God-given responsibility to defend my name, my wife's honor, my kids' honor. That's my responsibility. But believers should want justice, and they should see justice as a crucial godly trait and a way of imaging Jesus.
I would just say this: if the truth is what's at stake, then fight on, mighty warrior. Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman. You're about to make the jump from the dishonest mainstream media into free and independent thought from key thought leaders on the subjects of culture, causes, politics, and faith. Welcome to Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman. I have an amazing story to share with you today and an amazing guest, and that is no exaggeration. If you've been following the show, you know that we've broken some pretty interesting stories in the church, and today is no exception. So today, my guest is Stovall Weems. He is the founding pastor of Celebration Church. Now, Celebration Church was one of the largest churches in Jacksonville. But back in April of 2022, he resigned as the pastor of Celebration Church. And so today we're here to talk about some of the circumstances surrounding his resignation at Celebration Church. And I think it's a really important conversation. And we'll set the stage for why here in just a moment. But first, I just want to say, Stovall, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to be talking about this, especially with you, Reed.
I know. And this is a big week for you guys. We'll get into why that is. But there's been a lot of things happening with you guys in terms of some things that were happening at your church, some things that you took a stand against, and why you resigned from Celebration Church. So I just think even if there aren't people that are familiar with you or Celebration Church, I think that the story, as I have delved into it, is a public interest story, even beyond the Christian aspects of it. But certainly if you're a Christian, I think we need to pay attention to some of these things. And I want to set the stage with why, if that's okay. I know there's a lot of things we got to dig into, but the reason I think it's important to have the conversation that we're going to have today, I think, is ultimately, if I were to put a big broad umbrella around it, from my perspective, is that if you care about the truth, you care about digging into some of these stories and digging into what goes on with the church. I've always considered the church as kind of a canary in the coal mine, or at least what happens in the church is a reflection of typically what will happen in the culture. And so I care about the truth. So first and foremost, I care about biblical compassion. And I think we have this kind of esoteric understanding of love in the Christian church. So we say, you know, Jesus was a friend of sinners, love the prostitute, love the homeless person. And it's sometimes easy for us to say that because we're so distanced from that. The average Christian is on a regular basis anyway. And so it's easy for us to say, love, but not to really understand what that looks like. And I think this story hits a little bit more home. And I think love, at least, biblical compassion, and not just human empathy, which I think the left and liberal Christians and progressive Christians really get this mistaken. I think it demands that we be careful in drawing conclusions and that we hear the whole story. So I think biblical compassion demands that we have conversations like this where we hear your perspective about what's taking place.
I just want to piggyback off of one thing that you said that I think is absolutely crucial in the day and age that we live in, and what honestly has been shocking to both Carrie and I as we've walked through this, and that is a love for the truth, or I should say a lack of love for the truth.
Yeah.
And if there is anything in the culture that has definitely got into the church, it's this shunning, cancel culture, and then it what Carrie and I have walked through, it's like the truth doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
Like it just like there's no love for the truth. There's no stand for righteousness. There's no stand for justice, you know, what you call biblical compassion. And it's just whatever kind of the masses think, so to speak, or whatever they feel, or whatever they like, that's kind of, it's this, okay, that's going to be our narrative and our truth. And the real truth is not very important. And I've seen that, Reed, in people that I never thought I would see. I've seen people refused to look at evidence.
Yeah.
Refused to read.
I mean, the wolves come out in these kind of things. Yeah.
It's like amazing because they don't want their narrative challenged.
Yeah.
And
Let me just say this too. I think it's fair to say this, that like I understand the sentiment in some way when Christians respond very emotionally to a pastor resigning or a pastor leaving a church, especially if it's unexpected, because you think, at least I'll say this from my perspective, I won't speak for you, but people like Carl Lentz probably never need to go near a pulpit ever again as long as they live, right? And so there's this emotional response, in some ways rightly so. But I also think that we do ourselves a disservice if, whenever we hear pastor resigns or pastor's fired, not fired in your case, but you resign, or whatever happens where there's an issue with the pastor of a church, I think immediately the emotional side of our brain starts kicking on, and I guess that's what I mean by biblical compassion.
That's good. Yeah.
Is that we let the emotional side kick in, but we don't let the biblical side rein in our emotions and help us to think clearly about these things.
That's
because
so good, yeah.
I've dealt with this. At least you know my story a little bit, but I've dealt with this a little bit myself with other pastors on my show and behind the scenes. And boy, when I tell you the trolls come out when a pastor leaves a church, it's just really true. And almost none of them have any biblical basis for what they're saying. They're just ready to jump on and pounce on a Christian. And it's not only like atheists or non-Christians that are doing it; it's Christians within the church because they don't understand, and maybe because they don't really think from a biblical perspective on any of these things, but I also think it's because they don't have the other side of the story. I always like to say this: beware of one hand clapping, and all I mean is this: is that we need to get as much information from as many different places before we draw conclusions, and I think we should get better in the church, and I mean that not just Celebration Church, but I mean like church writ large.
Yeah. Well, to start off, I would say this. There is no short version of this story.
Right.
And so, there's going to be some gaps that I'm going to miss. And then, but we can always do more podcasts.
Well, I hope to, yeah.
To kind of give a summary story of what's happened, Carrie and I were transitioning. And so we were transitioning to this founding pastor role where I could focus on what's my heart. Well, I got into ministry in the very first place, and that's missions.
So you're looking for a succession plan at this point in time. You've been at how long have you been at Celebration Church at this time?
20 years.
Okay, so 20 years pastoring. It's time for succession. You've been there a while.
Yep. And it wasn't a succession where I was totally leaving the church. I just wanted to move into, some denominations might call it a bishop's role, a founding pastor's role, where really, the church is, being run by someone else, and I'm out there able to focus on missions and where my passions really are in the kingdom. And so we were in this really about a 3-year plan heading towards that. And to make a very long story succinct, there was a group of people that came together. The beginning of this started in the summer of 2020. They came together, trustees, some staff, overseers, and basically what they did was begin to create a false narrative and secretly meet and secretly plan my ousting. Mm-hmm. And I knew some things. One of the trustees had done some fraudulent billing and some other things. One of the staff members, I caught them doing some things. And basically, it all kind of culminated at the beginning of 2022 when they illegally seized the institution of the church by getting a litigating attorney, violating the bylaws, banning me from the property, and then going in and changing the bylaws, self-appointing themselves the highest ecclesiastical authority in the church with no ecclesiastical qualifications. They took all my power, the plenary power of the senior pastor. They took the power of the overseers, and the trustees that were only supposed to approve the annual budget are now in complete control of the church, and then place me under investigation without ever asking me one question, without ever meeting with me one time. So that's
I want to say something about that real quick, because I think this goes back to the why a little bit, just to make this important point. I think is that there is this story in the Bible where you got like people like Saul, who are going to be removed from ministry because of impropriety.
Yep.
But then you have stories like Job that you just mentioned, where a righteous man is being accused unjustly by his neighbor. And so I think a well-rounded view of Scripture understands that there's room for like a lot of these different takes on these things. So my hope today is to give some specific information about what took place in your story, so people can try to at least, because they're going to one way or the other, the court of public opinion is going to weigh in. And my hope is that they do so with as much information as possible. So
let me get back to that. I know I got off. Yeah.
So I think an important piece to just roll back to, and I really don't even know legally how much you can talk about this, but I think an important piece to roll back to is, you said the ball started rolling on this when you exposed something that was happening within your, was it your board or within your trustees?
It was within,
or just a church member?
It was within one of our trustees,
Okay.
and then also one of our staff members.
Okay, so trustee, by the way, for those who are watching, a trustee is nothing more than kind of a financial board member. Is that a
So
good way
in
of putting it?
our governance model, which several churches like ours have, the senior pastor, because I'm the founding pastor, that's what I was getting to. By the time after 24 years, the reason that me as the senior pastor has all this plenary powers because I'm the founding pastor,
Right.
As well. And so in this transition, I needed to disperse that power, so to speak. And so that was going on. And then with a staff member, I uncovered something, and that person wouldn't take ownership of it. And then with a trustee, I uncovered something very serious. And, I did Matthew 18. I confronted him. He said, that he was making it right. And so I just, once again, I'm transitioning, I'm okay, great. He just went sideways, whatever.
So there's room for restoration, not to mention this is something that perhaps that can be dealt with the next guy, and you don't want to make too many decisions, especially as somebody who's going to be rolling out whatnot. So needless to say, you take him at his word that whatever's going on, and again, I hope people understand that we're going to give as much information as possible, but there's also limitations to what we can and cannot say. But okay, so just so I understand correctly, and so the people at home understand correctly, so there's a confrontation that happens behind the scenes between you and somebody else. You confront somebody else, and then that starts the ball rolling on a couple of different things behind the scenes. And so you alluded to it, but let's get to ultimately the accusations that were made about you and about Carrie, because there are, I think, two. One that I almost don't want to get into because the others need the most amount of time, but suffice to say that there's been two accusations, I think, that have been out there in the ether. One of which is financial impropriety, and then another is spiritual abuses. We'll kind of get to the spiritual abuses thing in just a moment, but let's talk about the specific accusations that following that encounter that you had with that individual, that confrontation, these accusations that were then thrown at you, because ultimately we need to just say, all right, so you were accused of this, so you accused another guy of something else. So is there any validity to the accusation? So is it okay if we jump into kind of some of the specific accusations?
Yeah. If we, so to kind of finish that up, because this when we talk about love for the truth and things done in order and in a biblical way, this is really, really huge. And so this went on, our goal, they had a founding pastor emeritus agreement. They had all these things set up. And so the goal was at the end of the year, I transitioned into this role. And, I'm on my way. Remember, in our church government, trustees have no ecclesiastical power.
Yeah.
We used to have one meeting a year.
They're just a financial board.
Yeah. They just approve the budget. And the reason they have such a limited role is because nowadays, just like I've done every year, an independent financial audit, your lender has restrictions on you. There's just so many ways that you're, you know how it is. And so these trustees, as we were heading towards the end of the year, when it got to the end of the year, they basically didn't have any of those things done or planned or ready to execute like they said. And then what they did was the trustee that I confronted back in April, okay, he had done 2 more things since then. And so I had to, this was the meeting to confront him, like, you can't be part of any leadership team here ever. And so he fired back, my term is not up, and I'm putting you under investigation.
Wow.
This trustee says, I'm putting you under investigation. And so, well, you can't do that in our bylaws. Only overseers can even call for an investigation. The trustees can.
So let's pause real quick. So the kind of people that have the obligation and the leadership role to oversee the pastor would be the board, not the trustees. So just to make that clear, is that right?
Yeah. Those would be what we would call presbyters, apostolic elders, or overseers. We've used those interchangeably in our church government. Those are the ones that have the ecclesiastical power. They oversee me and the church. And if I was involved in any type of impropriety, a trustee, members could go to the trustees and call them, but you have to have 2 before you do it. They need to have a meeting with me so I can know what I've done, what questions.
Okay, so that's a kind of a bombshell right there, right? That gets laid at in your lap. But I think it's important to also understand in the midst of all of this happening, where is your board in all of this, right? Because so this trustee comes and takes a plenary power that he doesn't possess, and he usurps a power that the board would typically have. Where does he get off doing this, and where is your board to try to step in and stop this from happening?
Well, Reed, that's a very interesting question because that's
all I ask. Yeah, just a question.
That opens up the bigger case. Those guys, it was their responsibility to, number one, protect the church, protect me. They were supposed to keep order, and they did the opposite. They knew that this trustee coup was coming. They knew because they have the same bylaws or close to the same bylaws that I have. They knew the way that they were doing it was unlawful. And so long story short, this trustee says, you're under investigation, which then I walk them through how to investigate me the right way. I've never said I don't want to be investigated. I just want to do it biblically and in order. And, so confirm my overseers that I nominated right after John and Dino resigned. Remember, that's very normal because we used to only have a meeting once a year. And so people resign, you put your confirmations, and they said, no, we're not confirming them. And then the next thing that I know is I get a letter that I'm banned from church property. This is a litigating attorney. They have never met with me one time and told me anything that I've done wrong.
So at this point in time, you're not even like, they haven't tried to fire you. They just ban you from the property?
Yes, it is their first act, okay? With 0 meetings, 0, hey, Stovall, let's sit down and talk about this. We have some concerns here. So it started, if you want to say, in the court. It started with litigation, so to speak. It started with ban from the property, threat of arrest. I don't know what I've done wrong. I've never been interviewed. And then they do it to my wife as well.
So again, there's no like real ecclesiastical process taking place here with the trustees or the board. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is when I go to my thing. I start, calling ARC and calling people and saying, man, these are Middlebrooks bylaws. These are like ARC bylaws. These guys have completely unlawfully seized the institution. Come in and, can y'all help?
Yeah.
No help. Nothing. Silence. And to the point, Reed, I will show you an email. And in the email, one of the guys says, these trustees, we know one of them might have done some fraudulent billing and stole some money, but, overall, these are good guys.
Yeah.
And in that email, right when this started, you can see I was done. I'm not coming back as senior pastor. I'm not even coming back as founding pastor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have nothing to do with the church.
I mean, did they like slap a restraining on you, like you're the ex-boyfriend or something, or how did they try to
No,
ban
that's
you
what
from
we
the property?
found out. Them banning us from the property, that wasn't even lawful. It was like this whole fake. What the attorney did and what he's done to this day, and that there's a whole nother podcast on that. He used his legal profession, his attorneyness, to instill fear and coerce people to do things. So, man, I get a thing, memorandum of law.
Yeah, so you don't even know if this thing is legal, but it's from an attorney, so you're thinking to yourself,
Yeah.
well, boy, I better never go back because I can get arrested,
Yeah, my
sued, whatever.
father's attorney, an attorney sent me this. Well, there's got to be something to it. And so here's what they did. So they banned us from the property, threat of arrest or trespassing, calling the authorities if I come on the property, and then they cut off our communications. They seized our email and our personal information, seized it over the weekend. Mm-hmm. And I cannot tell you how devastating that was, because any employee has, we give them a few days to get your personal stuff. Like I had 24 years.
Unless you're the founding pastor.
Yeah, unless you're the founding pastor. So the chaos that has caused by cutting us off from all that, and then we can't talk to any of our friends. Mm-hmm. Now we've been shunned, and they're telling them not to talk to us. I've been given these, looks like legal orders not to talk to them. And then here's the thing. So then here's what they do. They unlawfully seized control of the institution that following Monday. This all started happening on a Friday. Mm-hmm. That following Monday, that trustee that I caught in the fraudulent billing with another trustee and this litigating attorney, not church attorney. This is like a corporate litigator. They go in and lead the staff meeting, the all staff meeting. This trustee leads the staff meeting with the attorney there and the other guy there, and tries to act like, oh, this is just completely normal. Yeah. And so in our culture, you'll know this, Reed. When a pastor, we can't find an example yet. If a pastor gets banned from church property and cut off like that, don't even talk to him. Yeah. In our world, he must have done something horrible.
Absolutely.
What a monster. I mean, all the guys that have really, unfortunately, done some really bad things, have really messed things up with sin and all that kind of stuff. They at least get questioned. Yeah. They get people accused of murder get questioned. And so
there's some due process. Yeah.
The slander. I mean, it was like 5 days. Reed, Stovall's gone. He's done something horrible. He's stolen all this money. It was total chaos. But here's what they did. Then,
can we stop real quick? Because I think that's an important point. Because people could be listening to this right now and be thinking, okay, so Reed's going to probably take Stovall's side, and I'm going to try to push back here in a moment when we get to the allegations, but this is just an opportunity to clear your name. But I would encourage people, okay, if we're going to be honest, intellectually honest about what just took place, then what we need to do is just investigate the claim that you just said. Was there any due process involved in what took place in your circumstance? And if yes, okay, but if not, then something's afoul, right? Because right there, in and of itself, something's fishy if they're trying to suspend any due process or allow you any opportunity to answer the allegations that were brought against you.
No due process, no questions, and that's evidence in the report that they finally came out with. Was April 22nd. I'm sorry, April 24th. April 24th, their report came out.
Yeah.
What's that? 4 months later.
Yeah.
And they had the reason we filed the first injunction at the end of February, they told us, oh, yes, you're coming in for questioning. We're going to do that right away. You'll see it. People will see it in all these emails and everything. Oh, yeah, we're coming for the first round of questioning. They never we were begging them. I demand, one time my attorney sent in a thing, we demand that you question the Weems.
And not to mention, we're talking legal due process, but we're also talking about biblical precedent to, hey, if there is an accusation brought against somebody, then go to them directly, talk to them.
Yes.
And then if they still don't listen, go take somebody else and go to the church. And then if they still don't listen, so there's this process laid out in Scripture for this kind of thing.
And that's how it got so, it's just so evil. So what they did was they led the all-staff meeting, first time ever a trustee did that. Then 2 days later, they went in with their attorney and they changed the bylaws.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, this is what I got to get to. This is the thing, Reed. But what they did was their attorney, that's why this whole thing was masterminded by this attorney, Wedekin. It was so well planned. They had a brilliant plan, really evil, but brilliant. So they go in, they seize the seat of power, and then they go in and they change the bylaws. They take out the plenary authority of the senior pastor. They assume the power of the overseers, and they appoint themselves the highest ecclesiastical authority in the church with no ecclesiastical qualifications. And then they announce, I'm under investigation by their attorney.
Wow. I mean, the thing that comes to mind here is like the big why, because I'm thinking if people are with us up to this point, they're asking, okay, so if this happened, there's no due process. If the board of trustees are taking on a plenary authority that typically would be relegated to the overseers who handle the pastor, set his salary and all that kind of stuff and deal with the pastor, why did they do this? So let's get to their accusations. Let's handle them. And then let's also, and I'll do my best to kind of just be an inquisitor here.
No, ask from every angle, because look, man, we have been through 4 different law firms, 7 different attorneys, 2 PCAs, 2 CPAs, 2 auditors, my new board. We have been looked at every which way.
Yeah.
And wait till you see this other firm that just looked into everything that a report's about to come out on. So ask away, man.
All right. So let's get to the cause. So not that they brought these charges initially when they finally said that you're banned from the property, but eventually they come out with this report that you can find on the Celebration Church website that is a legal report. Maybe this is standard, but I've never seen anything like it. But suffice to say, on the menu of the homepage of the church,
one of the 6 main. Let me define that for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
It is one of the 6 main engagement bars on the main page, which is its Celebration. That's the window dressing page for the public.
So the first, it's the front door of the church, and then you have a legal report for why they dismissed the pastor.
Yes. So and that's important. So it's right. By giving, about us, giving watch services report.
Yeah.
Like, it's designed for maximum visitor public access.
It's almost as if they're trying to shape consensus. So nonetheless, all right.
So, but watch this. But what you just said is the big misconception, and it's how this attorney really began to lead this thing. That's why he's a main defendant in the case, and that is, his report is not a legal report. It has nothing to do with litigation. It's not legal at all. He put his name, his firm's name, on a report and just spewed out all this stuff. But and that's what really, the narrative that they did, they just had control of the narrative for so long before we realized they are trying to destroy us. I mean, they are violent. It is like no severance, a victim, leak it to the press, front page of the website, just
Yeah, and your story has been on. I won't dignify the name of certain pseudo Christian journalist, but it's been on the front page of certain people out there in the Christian journalistic world. But then it's also been in places like the Christian Post did a couple different stories on you guys, and then also too, it's been on the local news here in Jacksonville. So you guys have gotten some pretty good publication with everything that's going on.
It's everywhere, you know.
All right, so so on the report, let's just dig into some of the accusations, and again, we'll try not to bog down too much in the details, but try to get at least what was said, and then why the accusation in your estimation is erroneous, and then I'll just try to ask some kind of push back and ask some questions about that. So the first one is this, and this is the interesting one to me because I know something about this because I took out a PPP loan for my church because we were a brand new baby church, so I get $300 a month for PPP because that's how much I was getting paid salary. But needless to say, so COVID hits and everybody and their mama gets the opportunity to sign up for a PPP loan. So it's something that anybody can do that has a business. And for those who don't know, suffice to say, I think it's like 80-20 split, that 80% of it is supposed to go to payroll and then 20% of it can go somewhere else. And then it will be forgiven by the government because the government shut everybody down. We won't even get into that, but the government shut everybody down. So they're making the decision. So they're going to fit the bill is essentially the idea. So you guys get 2 draws of PPP, I think, as it were. And the one of the allegations is that you were that you misused some of those PPP funds instead of using it for payroll or whatever. It was used for XYZ. So give us that. What did they accuse you of? And give us kind of your side of the story there.
Well, so the PPP money that we got was $1.1 million. I don't apply for PPP. I don't oversee the administration or whatever of PPP. I'm just really glad that they got it.
Yeah.
2020,
I was too.
Yeah, it was huge. And then I didn't even know that we had applied for it in 2021. Great. You know, our CFO tells us, hey, I applied for another round of PPP. Great, man. We're rejoicing, especially in 2021 because the revenue was going down. You know, that's another story with the new leadership and their stewardship, but the revenue was going down. So my heart for missions, I'm like, man, they're going to start pulling from these different ministry pools to help fund payroll. So I'm like, awesome. So it was
great. Yeah.
So that is the extent of my PPP thing. So
money is fungible anyway, so as long as you have more money in the bank than what you got in, you can just show, as long as you're paying payroll anyway, you can just show that money went to where it needs to go and be forgiven by the government. But what's interesting is that I know the way boards and budgets work, so you have a certain amount of money allotted to a certain line item each and every year. So how exactly are they accusing you of spending money that you shouldn't be spending when that budget's already preset by these people that are accusing you?
That's a very good question, Reed. Exactly. They changed the bylaws, gave themselves the power I used to have, plenary authority, and now those accusations in that report, that false report, they're trying to act like I'm under their coup 2022 bylaws and need approval for all this stuff. No, it had already been approved in the budget. The missions of the $800,000 that went to the missions organization, Honey Lake, that distributes it to all of our missions partners. So that was the second trimester missions giving, which was $500,000. The missions budget was it's actually 1.7 million, 10% of 17. They gave way less than that. So 3 times a year, $500,000. And the other monies that went there were from our Heart for the House for other missions projects. So he's trying to say that our budgeted, scheduled missions giving is PPP money, and that's nefarious. it's bizarre. It's like people went in there that had no knowledge of governance, of how things work, of how lending works, of how, and just threw a bunch of stuff up. It's that it's that bad. And if people, they're going to see this week, because what the church is arguing in the court, that's going to be made known. This other report that we have coming out, that's going to be made known.
Yeah. So people need to be following this stuff, but to kind of see the outcome of these individual kind of accusations being handled in a legal basis, the way they probably should have been originally. But suffice to say that every single year, a board is present to vote on a budget, and then they approve the budget, and then the pastor goes and is able to spend within the budget.
Yes.
So suffice to say, I think that pretty satisfactorily, as long as are they accusing you of spending outside of the budget on anything in that report? Because I don't remember seeing that. I don't see it like a purchase that you made or anything like you're buying a Lamborghini or a yacht, or if you do, let's go afterwards and go check it out. But
yeah, so the 2021 budget was a rollover budget from 2020 that was talked about in the December 2020 board meeting.
Yeah.
Well, that 2020 budget was $20 million. So $20 million rolled over. I'm the one that said, no. Tim's it's going to go down some. Let's set it at 17. So we set it at 17 million. It came in at 14 million. What I'm trying to say is I've never spent less in the history of me being a pastor than I did that year. It was extremely difficult as revenue tanked. And all these, read back to what you said. Why would somebody do this? Why would a small group of people do this? Because they are hiding something. And what they did to get to this point, there's a couple of people that are hiding really big things. And now it's in the courts and it is coming out.
Okay.
And the other people, a lot of them were brought into the narrative, and they pushed the narrative for so long. They started pushing it in the fall of 2020, and they pushed it so hard and so long, and they got so many people involved, including our own church attorney, Middlebrook, who never called me one time.
Yeah.
Goodspeed never called me one time like, hey, pastor, we're getting things from these trustees or something. I think you need to sit down and have a meeting with them.
Okay.
Like, that's the whole thing. Their goal was to never have me speak. That was the whole goal. And that's why as soon as it went down, no interview, don't talk to him. I can't talk to anybody. And I tell you, Reed, when we talk about a living, active faith of followers of Jesus, it is so evil to try to silence someone, and it is so destructive to the body of Christ, because if we can't sit at a table and do the one another's of the Bible, if I need to repent, what do I need to repent of? If we can't, how do we confess? How do we come to agreement? And so that's what they did with that attorney. They killed any communication. So.
And I have a suspicion about this too, and every time you say something that gets into the ballpark of my suspicion, I want to jump to it immediately, but I want to hold off, because I think I know why too. Why the table of communion, as it were, to use an illustration, might be cut off and increasingly cut off the more we kind of follow a certain system of doing church, but. I want to hold off on getting to that because I think that there's some other substantial things that I think would be beneficial to kind of talk about. So the PPP thing we just talked about. So let's talk quickly about houses, and then we'll talk about Turncoin. So another thing in the report is that they accused you of what I read the report as is this, and then you can tell me what your thoughts are. And I may be misreading it, but when I read the report, this is what I hear them saying. I hear them saying You personally bought houses with your own organization. Then you turned around and sold those houses to enrich yourself, and you sold them to the church. Now, again, I just want to jump in there and answer this because I feel like there's a glaring red alarm with that accusation, which is you approved the purchase. Like, what's the problem here when you're the board approving the purchase? Unless you just with divine fiat power just said, no, I'm going to make the church buy this house that I'm selling, so that I can line my pockets with money. So regardless of what anybody thinks about churches and boards buying houses and real estate and property and all that stuff, let's just talk about this from a legal perspective and push the moral things to the side for a moment and just say, okay, so is that pretty accurate? Is that what they're accusing you of?
Yes, they're accusing me that this shell cracker parsonage was this nefarious secret thing that I did without the board's knowledge or approval, and I pocketed all this money in some type of
because in fairness, you bought it at one price,
but
then you sold it at a higher price to the church. So why?
So when we bought the parsonage from our own company, there's a story behind that. What the church did was they came in and bought the shell cracker property and all of its assets and gave money for improvements at $1.286 million.
Okay.
At the time, the property was worth the fair market value if we would have sold it like everybody else was selling their houses, was $1,041,300.
Okay.
So we sold the house and its assets, all the furniture, all the FF&E as we talk about in the church world, for $1.286 million. We spent way over that in housing, in upgrades, in all of those things like that. We only paid $855,000 when we got it because we got a great deal, and it was before the housing mark spike. So
let me just step back just to make sure. So you're selling it at an increased rate because they're putting money for improvements that were placed into the house, but then also assets that were in the house, including furniture and that kind of stuff.
Yes. All of our furniture is just like, you just think of a ministry lodge or, whatever you think of. But here's the thing. The money that we spent on housing and on more furniture and on improvements and everything else, that money still exceeds if we would have paid the church paid the $855. Here's the thing. To us, it didn't matter because, number one, they're giving us the parsonage. And number two, we're going to spend way more than $455,000 on extra stuff when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, that's what I'm saying. And they were supposed to give it to us, which was in the founding pastor's emeritus agreement in December.
Yeah.
And they had a compensation committee that approved it. Everyone knew about it. The lender, the CFO, every single board person knew all about the parsonage.
So not only were you not enriching yourself on it, it's something that they all approved anyway. It wasn't just something that you just went and did.
Yes, and
behind the scenes.
And the temporary parsonage, I made them $175,000. The shell cracker property right now, if we sold that property and its assets, they're going to make more than $1.286 million.
Yeah.
I mean, I was able to, by the grace of God, I removed $6.5 million in payroll and ministry expenses a year, stepping out into these other missions things, helping to offload staff with the good faith expectation that they were going to follow through on these things that are in written agreements. They knew how much money I'd put into Honey Lake, my own personal money. And that's when they came and cut everything off with no severance, threat with they knew what they were doing. And so the shellcracker property, it's just simple. We transferred the property. It's worth more than $1.286 million. And I don't know what they were thinking But they surely weren't thinking. I mean, this is like how do attorneys say it? This is one of the biggest reckless blind action things that that some people have ever seen. And so what they thought was this, like they never thought like, oh, he's going to have to pay taxes. So he's going to have to account for all of these housing expenditures. They never thought like they said, I enrich myself. I have bank statements. I have auditors. I've got a CPA. So they're saying these things on that report. My CPA, one of the senior partners at a well-known CPA firm is like, he's looking at the actual bank statements. He's filing my taxes for how much money I lost in all of these things. So he's like, what are they talking about? What are they doing?
Yeah, I'll be the first to just be honest with you and say I don't like, because it just doesn't feel good, I guess. I don't like the purchasing of $1 million properties for parsonages, for churches, but it's also not illegal, and it's also there's no like direct biblical mandate against it, and it's also actually pretty common practice for churches because they have because they're 501c3s and because they're religious organizations, they have certain allotments and allowances for parsonages.
Yeah,
it's just written into the law.
That's why I didn't decide the amount of that parsonage. I didn't prove the amount of that parsonage. The compensation committee and the board did. And remember,
especially when you think about the fact that you're letting go of salary at this point in time.
If you look at what I was saving the church for the next 20 years, oh man, I just wanted a place to build for my family, for my kids, and anyone that goes out to Shellcracker, listen, Shellcracker is no swanky place. I assure you, it is a very raw neighborhood. You might have these amazing homes next to a trailer. But we wanted to build a place for our kids, our grandkids, and that was the seed of that. And so Reed, if you took all this away and you just all these facts and you just looked at them and said, okay, so you transferred your parsonage, or okay, so you purchased Turncoin. Okay, you got $100,000. You invested $100,000 in this investment for your staff, not you. When objective people look at this, they can't find anything wrong. Like what is? They see all the language and the slander and just trying to smear me. Yeah. But if you get and look at what's available with the evidence and the data and churches and my authority, I just didn't do anything.
They may not like it, but it's not illegal.
Yeah. People might not like the Turncoin investment, but it's not illegal. There's a lot of investments you would have invested in last year. They were great. This year, they're not. Yep. So far, Turncoin's doing okay.
They're doing pretty good.
Yeah, doing pretty good. They don't bring that out, of course. But
let's talk about Turncoin. The funniest allegation, to be totally honest with you, is the Turncoin allegation that's in the report, because Turncoin it's not a cryptocurrency. What is it called? It's a digital currency.
Yeah, digital currency.
It's a digital currency. So
it works like a stock share.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll be honest with you. I've told you I don't like the investing of church funds into these kind of things and these kind of investments, but this is also the funniest thing to me for a very special reason. So you take money and you give it to an organization, or you invest it into an organization called Turncoin, which is a digital currency. Now, a person on the outside, I'm trying to get in their head, they look at that and they say, well, why would you take that money and invest it in, give it to an investment? So why would you do that? Aren't you supposed to go feed the African missionaries or something like that? So that I'll let you tell why this is a little bit funny.
I'm sorry. I was just listening to you say, because Turncoin is the best high risk, extremely volatile asset investment you could make. Mm-hmm. Just kidding. No,
Yes. The point is people don't know what it is.
Yeah.
People don't know what it is. Therefore, they say,
Yeah. I'm trying not to do an infomercial for Turncoin right now.
Sure.
Okay. But it's, however, if you're looking to invest, so, no, Turncoin, just let me say, there's a whole story behind how we got involved with Turncoin. It has to do with the leadership, the mission, what they're able to do for kids, get out of poverty, their foundation. There's a whole thing behind it. But let's just go on investing money in, just putting church money into investments, which I have the authority to do. It's very clear from our bylaws, the non-coup bylaws. So, first of all, cash on hand. I mean, the PPP came in. We had 2.2 million before. The church took in whatever they had, $100,000 of the church's money I put in an investment because I believe in the company, but the main thing is I think it is the best chance that our senior staff has of getting any type of decent retirement. One thing we didn't bring up in the Parsonage thing was I didn't get any retirement for 20 years. And so starting in 19, the board at that time, they were giving me extra money. They were trying to get me set up for this transition and get off salary. Okay, so that's what I did. I took cash that was idle, $100,000. I don't know if people know this or not. You know how it is in churches. What does $100,000 get you? Like 2 intelligent lights. Like it's
not much in the whole scheme of things.
It's not much in the whole scheme of things. And I wanted to do something. I'm transitioning out. I thought it's the best chance for our staff that have been there with me, many of them for a long time, to at least have a shot at something significant for retirement. And lo and behold, it might crash next year. It might crash when it goes liquid in October. But lo and behold, we got it for $1 per Turncoin. Right now, it's almost $15 per Turncoin. So that $100,000 of investment is at least valued right now at almost $1.5 million.
How dare you invest $100,000 and make $1.5 million for the kingdom of God?
That's the point. And it's the point with the other missions organizations that invested in Turncoin. All of us, the board, everybody, we were trying to prayerfully look at things where ministries and churches could get a stream of revenue that's not so donation dependent.
Donation centric. And by the way, this is not to defend you. This is just the reality. More and more churches are leaning this way to try to figure out ways that they don't have to be so determined upon asking people for money. So you would almost think that this would be something that people would be like, okay, the church is finally starting to use their brain and getting a little bit more industrious and trying to build things for the kingdom rather than just dun people for money.
Yeah. And if it turns out to be bad and falls below the whatever, well then I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But let's wait and see if that happens.
Doesn't look like it's going to be that way. But not to mention, Turncoin itself is also not just your run-of-the-mill digital currency. It's also digital currency that also has a very humanitarian basis.
Huge, man. Go to the website, turncoin.com. I'd put more money in it tomorrow if I could. Look at when you understand how it really can pull, especially the kids, out of things. There's a real chance here to make a dent.
How does it do that?
Because it's the people for people. So anyone with any talent, it's like the soccer kid, just somewhere in some lost country in extreme poverty. If somehow he can get seen, he can eventually. He can have his own Stacks app, and you'll have to read all that stuff on the website. But he can.
So suffice to say, some of the investments go to help future aspiring athletes. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the philanthropy side to it, that's what got me excited, and the fact that we were able to get in, like in that when is the SEC? It's SEC regulated, by the way. It's not like Bitcoin. And we're like the initial cash offering, PPM. Like that's where, if it works, you've got a real chance to for it to explode. And once again, all of those things were for these ministries. And if you go look on the website, look at the people promoting it. Look at all the athletes and celebrities. And it's not some, shadow market in Uzbekistan.
Right.
And here's the thing. The first investor into Turncoin was one of our board members.
Yeah.
And there's 2 or 3 board members invested in Turncoin, along with several staff. Everybody was excited about it. Reed, that's why this is so evil. Like, they all knew. We were all doing these things together. And then when all of a sudden it's like, oh, we don't know anything.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's the most troubling for me, and maybe you would call it the most evil, is the last thing, because I found this extraordinary that in the report that they have online, they also list this as one of the, they wouldn't maybe say it this way, but I will, because it seems that this is what they're trying to do in the report. But they make one other allegation, and that is that you dared to have an encounter with Jesus Christ that began to weigh upon your conscience and weigh upon your heart with the way that we were doing church. So I know this is going to be another one of those things that's hard to succinctly describe, but I know that there's going to be people that aren't familiar with this. So could you succinctly describe the encounter experience, what happened, and then we'll go from there?
Yes, and I'll just say right now before your audience, I would love to do a podcast where you interview me on the actual encounter itself.
Okay.
That would be, yes. So anyway, once again, there's no short answer here, and an interview with that, would it usually takes a good 3 to 4 hours to really unpack it, but on Passover, the night of Passover 2018. We were doing a service, and I heard a Hebrew voice. I was doing it with a Messianic Jew. Passover happened to be on the same night as Good Friday, so he was doing the Seder type service.
Kind of like Passover meal kind of thing.
Passover meal. And so I heard a Hebrew voice that was not the guy that was ministering with me. It was not his voice. He was speaking. All of a sudden, it went into stereo surround sound, and it was Hebraic. And I looked over on the stage, and I saw the Lord. He was right there.
So, like, you mean you visually saw?
I visually saw the Lord.
Okay.
And he was on the stage, and he was looking out into the congregation. It was like instant. I knew that I had been operating as a ruler instead of a steward. I knew that I had been teaching things that I was not authorized to teach. I knew I'd been doing church in ways I was not authorized.
That encounter, suffice to say, that encounter for you, because of just that experience and that eye-opening moment that it was for you, it challenged everything that you were doing in ministry prior to that, or at least as many things as you could come up with.
Everything. It challenged everything. And so,
did you try to implement some of that understanding in the church?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And the Lord, he knows what he's doing. He chooses who he chooses. I look back, and it's like, it was just very disruptive. I'll be the first one to admit, Reed, until that encounter, okay, first of all, I was a very dysfunctional pastor. I like to say I'm the chief of sinners in the dysfunctional pastor realm. And I created a lot of that dysfunction in my staff by valuing things to an extreme that the Lord doesn't value. Yeah. And I had raised them in that, and they were that's how they were promoted, and that was.
So you think like maybe things like celebrity pastor culture, maybe things like that.
Yeah. It's more like, it's how we teach the Word of God, the Lord's ways. You know, looking at the filter of just, getting people in seats and church growth and all the attendance stuff, and all that leads to competition, and it's killing pastors, and then dying to self-preservation, doing what the Lord says, being willing to suffer with his people. There were just so many things, and so I think just kind of what happened with some of the staff was, it's like, okay, we've been doing this church growth thing, this church growth model, which we were very good at.
Yeah.
Very.
Made you successful and wealthy.
Yes. Major success. And it was like, all of a sudden the next day I'm turning around saying, the Lord showed up, tear it all down. And I think that was traumatizing in some ways. And the Lord visiting, it was traumatizing. It was very, I had no schema for what I saw when I was with him. And I had no schema for so many of the things that he showed me and deposited in me. And so working those out, and at the same time, if you go back, it seems like I was apologizing every message because I felt like I had ignored things that were very important to the Lord, and I had overvalued things that just weren't that valuable.
What's interesting to me about this is that if let's just say you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and you come into your board and you tell them, I had a vision from Jesus and things are about to change in this place. Now, that can be met with a bit of skepticism, and you would understand it. But when a pastor of a church says, I had a vision of Jesus, like, you would think the response to that would be, well, let's hear about it. Come on, let's go.
Yep.
However, that is unless it starts to potentially impact the cottage industry that's built around the church and money, and threaten people's positions of power. And what people may or may not know about you is, not only as a mega church in your own right with your own huge church, but you're also a founding member of the ARC organization, which is perhaps the biggest church planting organization on the planet. And when you start saying, I believe God spoke to me and we're doing things wrong and we need to change things. Well, there's two ways to look at that. One, this guy's crazy and we need to throw him to the side. Or two, man, let's hear this. Maybe God did speak to him. And I can't help but wonder if that first response isn't motivated by the fact that you're threatening people's pocketbooks now, and you're threatening the empires that men have built, that perhaps God may truly want to turn the tables over on.
Yeah, and I would say it this way, Reed, what it threatens is hierarchy. And so I'm speaking to myself. Before the encounter, I had no other way to think about Christian organizational structures like ARC or anything else other than hierarchical. And so that means in Christianity, or like what's going on, okay, this guy masters this skill, or he's, leading this network. And so he's the expert and we all go learn from him. And then, or this church has kind of got this thing going. So
yeah, to put a bow on that, maybe like, this is the dude that's the expert of small groups.
Yeah.
This is the dude that's the experts of getting new visitors. This is the social media expert guy.
Yeah.
We go to we surround ourselves with these gurus to build our church.
Yes, and then so what happens there is now this hierarchy begins to form, both intentionally and unintentionally. And so you go to a conference. I've spoken at maybe there's a few, but almost every major big Christian conference. And what happens is, it's like there's these green room dynamics. There's the green room that these certain people can go in, and there's a green room that
this is so true. There's a caste system based upon attendance.
Yeah, it is a caste system based on influence and attendance. I could even tell you about a green room within a green room in the highest level green room. But that's another podcast. And so what happens? What are we promoting? What are we doing? We are promoting hierarchy, competition, and value based on what we think is success.
Yeah.
Which is numbers and growth and all these kind of things. And so many times that has nothing to do with how God thinks of success. So you have all these pastors, right, that are really called, and God's called them to pastor and minister. But man, if they can't learn how to be like a CEO go-getter, apostolic world changer, it's like they're a failure.
It was startling to me, Stovall, to see this report and to hear financial impropriety. And this is why our pastor, why we brought these charges up against this pastor and why we forbade him to come to the property. And then in that same report to hear, almost as another allegation, he had an encounter with Jesus.
Yep.
Like, well, what's the problem there? And it's almost like they're tipping their hand as to what their real motivations are. Because you asked throughout, or at least I asked throughout this, and you're probably still asking, like, why? Why are these people doing these things?
Well, and we know for a spiritual reason, if the Lord did show up and it is his anointing and he did that, well, there's going to be no neutrality around that. And then the other thing is that's where they developed the crazy narrative.
Yeah.
So they have to have a reason. Why are there all these secret trustee meetings? And how are these attorneys getting involved before anything happens? And why aren't the ARC leadership team calling me and telling me what's going on? And why aren't they? It's this secret narrative that, yes, Stovall said he had this encounter, but he probably had some psychotic episode. And so we've got to...
And people have to understand this too in the midst of that, especially with places like ARC, who is, whether admittedly or not, a seeker-sensitive church planting movement. And so not only is it a threat when one of their own starts getting crazy and talking about having visits with Jesus or visions of Jesus, it also is fundamentally counter to their paradigm of ministry, which is... we don't talk about the goofy things that the Bible talks about, right? Like, we're not going to talk about speaking in tongues, and we're not going to talk about these kind of more mystical aspects that are clearly biblical, because the seeker and being sensitive to that seeker is important to us to such a degree that we will even hide a little bit of our biblical notions from the seeker so that we don't scare them away. We're going to be as careful as possible to make sure that we're paying attention to the seeker first. And this is where I just say, well, I understand the heart behind that, but whatever happened to being spirit sensitive. Because if we're really seeker sensitive, the one thing that we will want to be more than anything is sensitive to God. Because God is the one that draws them, not us. Yeah. And this is the thing that just blows my mind about the seeker-sensitive movement. And again, I just keep on coming back to this whole thing, like, to use it as an allegation against you, that you had a vision from God, and as though that's some kind of bad thing. Now, of course, they're not going to say that that's a bad thing. They're just going to say, well, we don't think that it was healthy for the church or the way that it was being done or whatever. But I think we could use some churches with some more visitation from Jesus, frankly, on a regular basis.
And it's like this. It's like, I will tell everybody this. If believe me, we thought we were going to lose half the church the Sunday when I began to talk about what happened. That was like Carrie and I prayed through, and we're like,
isn't that crazy though?
We were at the height of the church growth stuff, and we prayed through, and we thought, if the Lord, if half.
I have to say something about this.
We'll stay.
If it is a risk to see Jesus in church, then we might be doing church wrong.
Yes. So yes, how enlightening. So Reed, okay, this hierarchy thing's important though, because another thing in the encounter, how the Lord, treating his equals. So in the kingdom, there's authority, but there's not hierarchy, and it's very different. So here's how a typical. It's like this. Okay, most people, most pastors in America can think about in these network organizations is hierarchy. In other words, okay, wait, Stovall says he saw Jesus and now he's preaching all this different stuff. Man, I've spent 10 years climbing this hierarchical system.
Yeah.
If I start leaning into what Stovall's saying, here's how they would think. Well, then now I've got to get into Stovall's hierarchy. See, they're putting me in that worldly, like, now there's going to be a encounter Jesus hierarchy, and I got to do what he's saying.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
interesting.
yeah, and so it's this whole thing of, that's why there's so much competition. And then these hierarchies, they only affirm the people that echo what they're saying. And if you don't echo what they're saying, which I believe most hierarchies would be like that, well, then you're going to be ousted.
Yeah.
However, I will say that after COVID ran its way, there was actually a season there where I feel like the values at ARC became much more aligned with the values that came out of the encounter. I don't know if they talk about church growth much more. I know that they value wholeness and mental health. I know that the COVID, the Lord shook things. And a lot of those things that weren't kingdom that I was preaching before got shaken out in COVID.
Come on.
And so now it's like some people left those things out. Some people picked them back up. And so, I had great friends at ARC, and, but for those that contributed to this, and we can talk about kind of what the case is, they will be held accountable for what they've done.
Yeah. Well, I think if, and I know that there won't be everybody who does this, but for those who are willing to accept the suggestion that perhaps the allegations brought against Stovall are baseless, why did these people do this? I think this encounter thing that they include in the report is the mode of operation, the reason behind, could be at least the reason behind some of what took place. I know there's probably other motivations and other different things just because people are people, but I can understand that being this kind of overarching, like, he's starting to shake things up. He's starting to become inconvenient. So let's do something about that.
All those lies, all that narrative spun out of that. They used that the whole way through to build the other things, and then the people that did fraudulent misrepresentation and the conspiracy and all the other stuff and fraud and stole or whatever, all that's going to come out. And but you're absolutely right. If you want to get to the core event and that fueled the whole thing, I would believe that that's a big part of it.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that you've decided to not just be a bystander to all of this stuff, but to actually stand up and fight back a little bit here, if that's the right terminology, but at least to say you're how do I want to say this? Threatening. I don't want to say threatening class action lawsuit. Let me step back. So suffice to say, you haven't just been a bystander here. These allegations have come forth, and you're going to push back. So now that these things have come out, what are you doing in response to them? And I know this week is a big week, so include that too also in what's going to be happening Tuesday.
Yeah, so what we did, we resigned on April 15th from all affiliation with Celebration Church. I went and submitted myself under presbyters, overseers, apostolic elders, again, 3 really prominent men, pastors that have a lot of integrity in our city. And what they did was about 12 days after I left the church, they came out with the report. Now, this is April 24th.
And when you say they, you're not talking about those pastors, you're talking about the church.
The trustees, yeah. The trustees came out with this report. So remember, they banned me from the property January, 8th, 9th, 10th. Like, it's April 26th, Reed. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, they're finally coming out with the accusations. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you look at what they had in there, you can get all that stuff in about 2 weeks in our church office. So what we did was we had no other recourse to protect ourselves and especially protect my wife, which what they have done to her, how they have brought my wife and my family into this in the most hostile, damaging way possible is hard to believe. Mm-hmm. And so there's a justice for my wife component and the honor of my family, which is important to both my kids and my wife.
Yeah.
And then, but we had no other recourse than to address the allegations on the main page of the Celebration Church website that are still up to this day.
Yep.
So what we did was we filed a lawsuit that centers around defamation. And here's why. Because it puts their report on trial. So what's really on trial is the truthfulness of what is in that report. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're making them, or we believe the judge is going to make them and not go into arbitration. We want them to stand trial publicly because they publicly have that on the website to this day. Mm-hmm. And they're promoting it on the...
Yeah, I think it's only fair. They should have to answer for it.
They have to answer publicly. Also, biblical principles. Reed, if I say something about you that's not true, mm-hmm. if I lie about you intentionally or unintentionally, if I slander you in public in any way, my repentance is not just to you. I need to make a public repentance.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to answer for that in a very public way. And so that's what our lawsuit is. We had no other choice. I had to protect my wife. She's still not safe because of what's on the website. Everything has been, it's just hostile. Mm-hmm. And that's going to come out. So that's what that is. And people can go to stovallweems.com and they can read kind of a legal summary. They can read the case filing if they want. And that's where a lot of the details that we're talking about, they can get some really good information. I will say this. On August 9th, right? So that's Tuesday is when we appear before the judge the first time.
Okay.
They have not answered one of our charges that these things are not true. And Celebration is going to actually, and I say Celebration, I do not like saying this is Celebration Church, even though technically it is. It's really these trustees and their attorney.
Because there's people that just kind of are biased, innocent bystanders.
It's like 7 people. It's so they are going to argue against the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah, this is great.
And what they're going to do is they're going to challenge the U.S. Constitution about freedom of religion. A person's right to worship where they choose, what church they choose, what religion they choose, and they are going to side with Scientology dogma that says no, certain members, they can't leave until we, the trustees, say so.
Wow. Now, why are they doing that? Why is it important that they make you a member?
Because then they can try to get it in this ecclesiastical religious abstention
So
thing.
they're trying to duck the law, in other words. Okay.
Yes. Yes, they're trying to break the law in the name of religion. They want to slander in the name of religion.
So if by making you a member, they don't have to abide by, they can say there's religious exemptions for some of the things that we did.
They can only try that. It's not going to work because if you go look at the Scientology cases, Scientology and some of their offshoot cults, they would have these billion-year membership contracts, 50 pages, legal. And so what happened is people would try to leave. I mean, you can see documentaries on it. They would say, no, according to, you signed the contract, according to our religion, basically, we can destroy you in the name of the religion. That's what our religion says. Well, it started going to the courts, and the courts were like, no, Constitution, freedom of religion. Yeah. Every individual has the right to go to whatever church, choose their religion, choose their whatever. You cannot make a person stay.
Yeah.
They've already gone. And so
that's so insane.
Yeah, that's not going to hold up. The embarrassing thing is they're actually going to try that.
Yeah.
Like Scientology did. And they're actually going to think about the average person. Like, think about this. You go ask hey, did y'all hear? Like, this is all the things that we've said. All of our filings, all of this stuff. What is the best they got? Stovall, still a member. Mm-hmm. So everyone needs to know on August 9th, that is what the trustees, that's their best shot. Let's try to say Stovall's a member.
Yeah.
And he has to stay a member until the trustees say I'm no longer a member. So, yeah, no evidence, no anything. It's just, and their accusations against me were so public, Reed. They ought to be glad to publicly
let's go,
back
right?
them up. Yeah, but
nothing. Okay, so I think that this is very important, at least I think, for people to follow along, because let's just say that they might even greet this podcast with a sense of skepticism. And then I would do what you just did, which is encourage people to follow along, to see what actually happens here, so that in the future we can be a little bit more critically thinking about things that we hear and about things that go on in the church, so that we can, hopefully return back to a biblical understanding of church. And then also, if there are any cracks in the foundations of the institution of the church or the way that we're doing things, fix those things.
Yeah. So, Reed, think about this, think about, which is why it's so important it's in court, because all the serious things they charge me with are secular criminal laws. Have nothing to do with religious doctrine. But think about this. If one rogue, fraudulent billing, scheming trustee can get a litigating attorney, okay? Or as the church attorney says, if one rogue trustee, or it doesn't say rogue trustee, if one trustee can call your church attorney, David Middlebrook, here's what the church attorneys, Lee Wedekin says, call David Middlebrook, and the pastor never even get a phone call. Yep. And somehow David Middlebrook with the trustees doesn't call you, and then they get a litigating attorney, make up false accusations, and oust you, claim criminal charges against you. Think about, I would say this, if this can happen all over America, if this sets some kind of precedent, people need to get really, really careful about what they hear about men and women of God, about spiritual leaders, and about pastors. Because if you can do what they did, thank God we had a family that could help us, but it would, the lawlessness that
it's devastating.
Devastating.
The truth is that you've lost the church that you started. You've lost your health insurance. You've lost, in some ways, I know that they can't really take this from you, but it feels like this, lost your reputation.
Oh, yes. To rebuild my reputation, Reed, they have that narrative out there for so long. Man, it's going to take work. I'll call people. they won't even look at the evidence. That's like your readers, if they could, or your listeners, if they could please go in and actually look at the documents, and they're going to see over this next week or two.
Yeah,
they're going to see a lot of evidence. It's like people don't want to hear it. It's like it's
out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, that's a good place to end. I think is that like. I think compartmentalization is easier, so we don't have to critically think about a pastor who's been accused of something. We just have to entertain the accusation and accept it. But the harder work and the more important work, the more sophisticated thing to do is to actually weigh these things, to think about what's actually taking place. And I think that not only helps us know the truth in your situation, but boy, that helps us be clearer biblical thinkers on a multitude of different things. So I think your story really serves as a microcosm for something much bigger and more important.
Yes, absolutely. And what you said in the beginning, there's still love for the truth.
Yeah.
There's still the truth. And think about, if you look at all of the biblical characters, think about Jesus and Paul. What if people just believed all the terrible things that were said about people in the Bible? I think, and here's another thing we could talk about at another time. If we're really, if pastors are really following the Lord in the sense of preaching the gospel of the kingdom and standing for the truth, is it more normal for them to be slandered or not slandered?
Wow.
So going into, I'm like, I got to stop the slander. I got to stop the slander. And I've realized, there's a problem if I'm not being slandered.
Come on. I think people have this impression of Jesus that he was just so darn God-blasted nice that they just had to crucify him because he was so pesky and loving, rather than that he was actually confronting, much like the encounter that you had, confronting the status quo of his day, and it was a threat to people, and then they wanted to kill him as a result of it. So suffice to say, I think it's really important that people kind of follow along with what's going on. And I think it's a really important time that we're releasing this podcast prior to the week where these things are going to be heard. I know the decision's probably going to take a little bit of time, but people can follow along at least and hear what's happening. So what's the best way for people to do that, to stay up with your story and to follow you and what's going on with you?
Yeah, I think this week, what we've done is on Stovall Weems Ministries.com, it's just kind of my personal ministry page. There's a bar up there that says legal case.
Yeah.
And so they'll see summaries, they'll see our case, and we're putting some other things up there this week too. We think it's real important that the church as a whole sees what the trustees and this attorney are arguing. And when they see that and they see those lies, I think that's going to help explain a lot of things.
Okay, so they can follow you on your website. What about social media? Are you posting stuff about this?
I am this week.
Okay,
Yep.
So they can follow you there as well. I'll put any of that stuff down in the description of this episode below so that people can access that. But I'll just say this. As a person who started a church and has pastored in multiple different capacities, I can only imagine what you're going through. And there is a human side of me outside of the technicality of all the things that we've talked about today and the allegations and all that stuff. And my heart does break for you that it seems as though perhaps that everything that you've known has just been shaken and destroyed and taken from you. So I just want to say that I'm sorry all this happened, but I know that God's going to use it for good.
He is. And I want to let everyone listen out there as well. Listen, we are not bitter. We are grateful. In some ways, Reed, speaking to how this is a microcosm of something bigger and things that are coming, I think this had to happen in some ways. We're looking forward to what the Lord has for us in the future. And, we're fighters.
Yeah.
I mean, all of us, the body of Christ, it's in our DNA. The Lord's a warrior. The heavenlies are at war, and we're made for war. We're made to fight. Like,
Well, I thought about that too. When Jesus does come back, it is the ultimate justice. But we talk about like, oh, don't be a culture war Christian, and don't, you're not supposed to fight these battles. You're supposed to just love people. It's like, have you seen what the end of the story looks like?
Yes, he's taking vengeance. And so, anyway, I think that when we're it's like this, love for the truth. You look through Scripture, when it talks about last days, however you want to qualify that, 10 years, 1,000 years, whatever you want to qualify it, the love for the truth is the primary.
Yeah.
Reading Matthew 24, reading Timothy, it is the primary thing. That it doesn't say a love for church. It doesn't say a love for going to Bible study.
That's right.
Those things are important. It's a love for the truth. And what I know is the Holy Spirit will guide us into all truth if we have a love for the truth. And so that love for the truth can't happen without justice.
Yeah.
And so in the body of Christ, we've got this really weird, modern, westernized, whatever this thing is, that justice is somehow, we shouldn't seek justice.
Yeah, it's suffering in silence and just taking it.
Yeah, taking it. And that's the other thing, like, okay, it's like, let God defend you. Yes, of course, God defends me. You can't find one story in the scriptures where every single, like, the Lord will fight for you and you will hold your peace. Yeah, and then Moses and Joshua and them went to war against Amalek in a ruthless, violent battle, and the Lord was with them because they cooperated with him. If you look at how many times Paul had to defend his ministry, Jesus had to defend his ministry. He's constantly arguing with the people that were coming against him, and the only time Jesus didn't defend his authority and his name, his Father's name, was at the very end when he chose to lay. He said, I'll call down all these angels right now. I'll wipe this place clean. I could do that if I wanted to, but I choose to lay my life down. I choose this. After that, he was a sheep to the slaughter, and he didn't open his mouth. I can't clear my name, Reed. I need people that believe in truth and justice to help do that. But it is my God-given responsibility to defend my name, my wife's honor, my kids' honor, and rebuild my reputation, my wife's reputation. That's my responsibility. But believers should want justice, and they should see justice as a crucial godly trait and a way of imaging Jesus.
I would just say this: if the truth is what's at stake, then fight on, mighty warrior, because there's never a time where we don't need to know it and to fight for it and to stand for it. And God forbid there ever be a time that we don't. So thank you that you're willing to even go the extra step to push these things a little bit further in court and hold people accountable where they need to be held accountable, because I know that's not easy for you either, or anybody that's involved. But if the truth comes as a result of it, it's a price worth paying. So thank you for your stand, man, and thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, Reed.
All right. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.
Our thanks again to our guests for being on the show today. Indie Thinker with Reed Uberman was brought to you by our sponsors. If you like what you heard today, please do us a big favor and give it a 5-star review and like it and share it with friends. And if you want to hear more awesome guests, make sure to check out past episodes. Indie Thinker is a nonprofit paid for by our sponsors and the generous gifts of people like you. In order to hear more great guests like you did today, please consider giving a tax-deductible gift by going to indiethinker.org. And just remember, your voice matters, but infinitely more when you think for yourself.